Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, whenever you are, whichever realms of existence you are, whatever mind states you're in, whatever conditions you're in, you're of course always welcome to my channel. Part 2 of my Mahayana New Year Dharma activity, we'll call it. I'm reading from this book, the Religions book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. And the reason I'm reading it is because this, well, at least the Buddhist section, I'm not reading the whole thing, just the Buddhist section, is my father-in-law asked me to do this. I think both for his own knowledge, but also for, I think he wants to maybe use this section of this book, of the book, or this whole book, for something he might be doing with Quakers. And also it's just part of our ongoing Dharma, I have a dialogue with him about Buddhism. And anyway, so I decided to coincide my monthly talk with him, which we usually meet on Wednesdays. And I decided, well, let's do it on the 25th of the month, and we meet monthly, and to have our own dinner, just he and I. And I said it on the Mahayana New Year's Eve, I should say. So we're going to an Indian restaurant for kind of to celebrate, and also this is part of my one of the things people do on Mahayana New Year's is Dharma activities, reading sutras or whatnot. And so I thought, why not incorporate this into that? And I thought I'd read this again. I'd only skimmed it before, and read it properly before I go to my dinner with him to talk with him about it. And figured, why not share it as part of, again, New Year's activities. So so where we left off was so this is Religions of the World, the Religions book by D.K. Random House is the publisher and the copyright owners, and I'm not doing this for any kind of profit. There's the copyright stuff, and it's DK Penguin Random House are the copyright owners, and I'm only doing this for educational purposes, fair use educational purposes reading. So, and I'm only reading parts of the book. I'm not reading the whole thing, and only parts of the part of the book I'm reading. So it's not really a full reading of the book at all, obviously. So, right. So the next part that we're looking at here is the section called Test, which is a very important aspect of Buddhism. Test Buddha's words as one would the quality of gold, which is what Buddhism teaches, and the Buddha himself taught. Test my words as one would test gold, in the various ways that gold is tested to make sure it's pure, it's true gold. And that's an important aspect of being a Buddhist. That is your responsibility as a Buddhist, to test the Buddhist teaching, to test it, take it as far as it will go. And it's a very important part in Jodo Shinshu of your Dharma dialogue, of deep listening, of that process. And it's been a very important part of mine. And I've mentioned this quite often, because I've you need to test the teachings to make sure it's true for you. It's the true, real stuff, as part of your Jodo Shinshu journey, as part of your Buddhist journey, Jodo Shinshu Buddhist journey, and your Buddhist journey. That is an important part. So anyway, Buddhists don't just accept things on faith. We test it, and then once that's tested, then you can take the Buddha at his word, and trust the Buddha's teachings, and so forth. So anyway, here we go. And they even emphasize what I just said. It's got to be true for you. It's your own personal responsibility. And it says as the tagline, so test Buddha's words as one would test the quality of gold, the personal quest for truth. Okay, so in most religions, beliefs are based on authority, whether that of a particular leader, a priestly class, or sacred texts. People who accept these beliefs may seek to defend them rationally, while those who feel unable to assent to the beliefs of their culture may be branded as heretics. Buddhism is different indeed. It pays great respect to Buddha and other religious teachers, and some Buddhist traditions make much of the value of having a teacher with a particular lineage or tradition. However, and this is a big however, the faith also values debate and discussion. Teachers and intellectual convictions are seen as only a starting point. Buddha argued that people should not take any of his teachings on trust, but should test them out both rationally and also in terms of personal experience. Buddhist wisdom is therefore acquired in 3 stages: from the teachers, or by reading scriptures, from personal reflection and thought, and as a result of spiritual practice. Boom. The 3rd stage generally involves meditation, the search for truth and spiritual growth, and putting Buddhist teachings into practice. I'd say all of that is pretty much the same in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, except for the actual meditation part, where we kind of accept the Buddha has already done Buddha Amida has already done all the meditating and is giving us his mind, his merit and virtue, and the results of his meditation. Early followers of Buddha achieved enlightenment by seeking understanding of his teaching, not by believing his word. Buddhism still argues that belief should be based on personal conviction and experience rather than simply trusting external authority. Religious discipline is necessary. The purpose of monastic vows. So this is the next section. Religious discipline is necessary. The purpose of monastic vows. Throughout his life, Buddha had 2 kinds of followers: monks and householders. The monks were wandering preachers like Buddha at first, but later they settled in monastic communities. Here they followed disciplines that aimed to benefit their own spiritual progress as well as the community. Householders, too, could achieve enlightenment since they practiced Buddhism and helped the community of monks. Again, Jodo Shinshu tradition has some different teachings about these things, that in these times, I'm not saying there shouldn't be monks and there shouldn't be, those establishments and those institutions and traditions, but we do our teaching is that self-power Buddhism won't bring us to enlightenment. We can't do. It's impossible for a bamboo, an ordinary foolish being like ourselves, to become enlightened through self-power practice. But that's not to say these institutions aren't important, and that their contribution to to Buddhism and to the lives of monastics and to the lives of the communities that monastics benefit. That's all very important and should go on, and we should continue. We have no issue with that at all. It's just we personally believe we cannot attain Buddhism through self-power practices. So anyway, and there's whole teachings about in Mappo about the age of Mappo, about monks and nuns and things, but that's a whole nother topic and video. About 100 years after Buddha died, debates began about how strictly the monastic rules should be obeyed. As Buddhism spread, it developed different traditions, some of which, particularly in China and Japan, placed less emphasis on monastic life. Nevertheless, so that's where, Pure Land Buddhism factors in that, and Jodo Shinshu in particular, and also other traditions actually that are place less emphasis on the monastic life. Nevertheless, monasticism remains an important feature of Buddhism, especially in Sri Lanka and Thailand, which follow the Theravada tradition. In Buddhism, monastic vows are taken for a limited period rather than for life. The vows are not an end in themselves, but aim to create conditions that assist Buddhist practice. They are not essential, but helpful in following the middle way. However, individuals must not simply strive for personal enlightenment, because that would be self-defeating, implying a measure of selfishness incompatible with Buddhist teaching. Rather, they must attempt to develop universal compassion and goodwill, which have a social as well as a personal dimension. Okay. So the next section is renounce killing and goodwill follow. Let kindness and compassion rule. That's the name of the next title of the next section. Buddhism arose out of Hinduism, a faith. That's not exactly correct. It didn't arise. It was certainly one of the contexts of when the Buddha went on his spiritual quest and journey and became enlightened, and was certainly a context of that. I would not say Buddhism arose out of Hinduism. That's just not, I don't agree with that. So I'll just say it this way because that's the way it's written here. But Buddhism arose out of Hinduism, a faith that had always been ambivalent about killing. On the one hand, Hinduism promoted the principle of ahimsa, not killing. On the other, Hindu society required animal sacrifice, allowed meat eating, and regarded fighting in a just war as an inescapable duty. Like many other teachers of his day, including Mahavira, founder of the Jain religion, Buddha emphasized the principle of not killing, and it became the first of the 5 principles that form the ethical basis for those following the Buddhist way of life. 5 rules for living. The 5 precepts forbid the taking of life, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and the consumption of mind-dulling intoxicants such as alcohol. Each of these precepts has a positive counterpart, effectively generating 5 rules relating to things one should do. The first of these is to treat all beings with loving kindness, and that's metta. Indeed, one of the principal meditation practices in Buddhism is the cultivation of goodwill toward everyone, treating friends, strangers, and even those that one might find difficult, with equal care and concern. Equanimity. The broad positive approach evident in the first rule, It's part of equanimity, anyway. The broad positive approach evident in this first rule, underpins the other four. Positive goodwill toward others supports the principles of generosity, non-exploitation. The third precept is generally taken to prohibit adultery, rape, and other forms of sexual exploitation. Honesty and the keeping of a clear head to ensure correct decisions and actions. Although the principle of not killing was a key feature of Buddhism from its beginning, the first attempt to apply the principle to the whole of society was made by Emperor Asoka in the 3rd century BCE. This is evident from the many edicts that he issued, 32 of which have been discovered carved on pillars or rock faces. As well as advocating the avoidance of killing, Ashoka promoted support for the poor, the protection of servants, and the establishment of medical centers and veterinary services, all direct expressions of metta. Ashoka was definitely a Chakravartin king of our kind of not of our literally our time, but our kind of in the broader sense of our epoch, if you will, our kalpa, if you will, our portion of the declining kalpa, if you will. He was definitely an amazing Buddhist king. I'd like to do a video on just him at some point. A peaceful ideal is the next section. Although there are rare cases of self-harm, as the suicide of Buddhist monks, who have been known to set themselves on fire as an extreme form of political protest, in general, Buddhism has never sought to impose its ideas upon society by force, nor has it ever become involved in war. The principle of not killing suggests that, as an ideal, Buddhists should be vegetarian. However, Buddha's middle way indicates that self-denial must never be taken to life-threatening extremes, so Buddhists may eat meat and fish if it is deemed necessary for their health, or where there is a shortage of fruit and vegetables, as in the mountains of Tibet. Monks and nuns may eat meat and fish if it is offered to them and has not been killed specifically for their benefit. There's a lot more to say about all of that, the whole vegetarian thing, which, like I said, Kyokan and I have done a video which I'll be uploading in the near future, I hope. In the nearest future, at least sometime this year. I'm bound and determined to get all caught up with all my content, so it's present, so I have a Dharma dialogue session and I upload it within that week type of thing. But anyways, so there will be one on vegetarian we made. It was a very good Dharma dialogue discussion, covered a lot of things, so because I really had questions about that and really wanted to discuss that. So as part of my deep listening, as part of my Dharma dialogue discipline in activity, in Dharma activity in my Jodo Shinshu path. Right, the next section is we cannot say what a person is, the self as constantly changing. Just need to check the time. I have no way to check time here, so never mind. I'll just continue. Might be a part 3 on this one. I'll do this next part, and then there's like a whole new section of Enlightenment Has Many Faces. So I think I might do a part 3 of my Mahayana New Year's special, let's call it. Right, so we cannot say what a person is, the self as constantly changing. The idea that a human being comprises a physical body and a non-physical self or soul is deeply ingrained in almost all religious traditions. It forms the basis of speculation about afterlife, death. Wait, say that again. It forms the basis of speculation about life after death, whether we survive in some form in heaven or hell, or are reincarnated as a non-physical self, takes on a new body. Belief in a immortal soul and in God seem the very essence of religion. Both, however, were rejected by the Buddha, who believed we have no fixed self. The idea that we do not have a permanent self, but are constantly changing, is absolutely central to Buddhist teaching and sets Buddhism apart from most other belief systems and philosophies. Indeed, Buddhism is like a category unto itself, is a completely different religion and spiritual path than any other. Definitely, in all these ways that these texts have been pointing. This book has been pointing out, and I have. It implies. It is implied by Buddha's teaching of the middle way, and also, what we just said, the idea that we do not have a permanent self but are constantly changing is absolutely central to Buddha's teaching and sets it apart. It is implied by Buddha's teaching of the middle way, and also reflects his teaching of the interconnectedness of all things. However, nowhere is the idea of the changing self better illustrated than in the Questions of King Milinda, written anonymously in the 1st century CE. The text describes the discussions between a Buddhist sage the text describes the discussions between a Buddhist sage known as Nagasena and King Milinda, the Indo-Greek ruler of northwestern India, circa 150 BCE. Analyzing the self. Milinda starts by innocently asking whether the person he is greeting is indeed Nagasena, whereupon Nagasena launches straight into the discussion by stating that although the name Nagasena is conventionally used to refer to himself, there is actually nothing that corresponds to it. The word is a designation, a mere name, because no real person is here to because no real person here is apprehended. In an absolute sense, Nagasena does not exist. That's what he was saying. Bewildered, the king asks how that can be the case, since Nagasena is clearly standing there in front of him. To answer this, Nagasena uses an analogy. He observes that the king arrived in a chariot, so it is obvious that a chariot exists. But he then starts to analyze the various parts of the chariot, the axle, the wheels, and so on, and asks the king if any of these are the chariot, if any of these individual constituents are the chariot, eliciting the answer that they are not. So where is the chariot? Nagasena asks. If it is not the wheels or the axle and so on, where is it? Clearly, there is no chariot over and above the parts from which it is constructed. Chariot is a name applied to the collection of those parts when they are put together to make the vehicle. In the same way, Nagasena argues there is no fixed or permanent self over and above the various parts of which we are made. Nagasena does not represent anything that Melinda could point to. That's the story. And then there's a quote of Nagasena. I'll read that in the corner here. I am known as Nagasena, but the word Nagasena is only a designation or a name in common use. There is no permanent individuality involved in the matter. Kind of sums it up quite well. Okay, so 2 more pages here for this part. Like the chariot, Nagasena refers to a set of elements that exists in a state of mutual dependence. Buddhists view the human being as made up of 5 interdependent skandhas, literally translated as heaps. These are form, our physical body, sensations, information about the world that is constantly fed to us by our senses, perception, our awareness of the world through sensations, and mental formations or impulses, our ongoing flow of ideas, intentions, and thoughts about the things we perceive. The 5th skandha is consciousness, the general sense we have of being alive, including an awareness of the information streaming in from our senses and our thoughts, ideas, and emotions. The key feature of Nagasena's argument is that each of these skandhas is constantly changing. This is most obvious in the case of form, or the physical body, as we change from being a baby to an adult through the physical process of aging. But it is also true of the other 4 skandhas. They too are in no way fixed. They reflect a constantly changing stream of experience and response as we change with life. This means that not only is it impossible to point to Nagasena, it is also impossible to say whether anyone is the same person during the course of one lifetime, exactly, or one moment to the next. Nevertheless, we still have a sense of a person being the same over a lifetime, since each of us has a past and a future. Nagasena points out that it is absurd to say he remains the same over time, but likewise absurd to say he does not. In fact, Nagasena insists that the questions themselves are wrong because they presuppose a fixed self instead of one that is dependent upon the body. In a further example, to illustrate the dependency of the self, Nagasena asks Melinda, King Melinda. Let me read that sentence again. In a further example, to illustrate the dependency of the self, Nagasena asks Melinda to consider milk, curds, butter, and ghee. These are not the same things, but the three stages, curds, butter, and ghee, cannot be made unless milk first exists. That is to say that butter only exists because milk exists. It depends on the existence of milk. In the same way, says Nagasena, do the elements of being join In the same way, says Nagasena, do the elements of being join one another in serial succession. One element perishes, another arises, succeeding each other as it were instantaneously. So yeah, that's the key thing. We read that again. In the same way, says Nagasena, do the elements of being join one another in serial succession. One element perishes, another arises, succeeding each other as it were instantaneously. A category mistake is the next section. In the 20th century, the British philosopher Gilbert Ryle attacked the idea that the material body is linked to a non-physical mind. In doing so, he used an argument that is exactly parallel to Nagasena's. A visitor to the city of Oxford, who has been shown various colleges, libraries, and so on, asks, but where is the university? Ryle claims that there is no university over and above its constituent parts. Likewise, there is no mind that exists separately from the body. People who suppose that there is a people who suppose that there is are making a category mistake, where things of one kind are presented as though they belong to another. It is wrong to treat the mind as though it is an object of substance, when the mind refers to a collection of capacities and dispositions. This last bit. Toward the end of the 20th century it's toward the end of the 20th century and into the 21st, most Western philosophers have argued for a materialist or physicalist view of the mind. That mind is simply a word that describes brain function. For modern science, there is no self over and above the body, the brain. The brain performs a complex processing of experience and response, which we think of as our mind or self. This differs from Nagasena only in the way that the sage applies a closer analysis of the way in which we experience ourselves as thinking, feeling, and responding beings. As he pointed out to King Melinda, even the fact that we do this does not mean that there is a separate thing called the self. The other modern philosophy that unwittingly builds on this Buddhist idea is existentialism. I've kind of said the same thing at times. And I was referring to earlier the stuff about science that points to the same direction as Buddhism does. But anyway, the other modern philosophy that unwittingly builds on this Buddhist idea is existentialism. It is often summed up in the phrase, existence precedes essence, meaning that we are born and exist before our lives have obtained any sense of purpose. Existentialism suggests that we shape our lives by the choices we make and should acknowledge our responsibility for doing so. We are what we choose to do. We do what we have an internal real self. We do not have an internal real self or essence. Now, the difference with existentialism, among many other things, with how it differs with Buddhism, is there's no bit of nature in existentialism. It's just a naturalistic universe, closed system. There's no spiritual, there's no metaphysical aspect, there's nothing to that. It's just is what it is, and it's kind of an absurd, purposeless universe. And that very much differs from the Buddhist idea of Buddha nature, and that, samsara is none other than nirvana, etc. Anyway, so absolute truth. This discussion of the self I don't like that word. The heading is called absolute truth. I really don't like that terminology, but it's kind of the sum up of this. So let's just say the conclusion heading part. The conclusion part. This discussion of the self highlights an important feature of Buddhist teaching, the difference between conventional and absolute truth. Again, with the absolute truth thing. In order to function normally, we have to assume a pragmatic or practical approach and refer to objects as though they have a recognizable, permanent, and independent existence. It would be impossible to communicate if everything had to be described in terms of its constituent parts. Buddhism therefore accepts the need for such conventional truth or provisional truth, another way to say it, but constantly guards against mistaking it for the ultimate reality, the ultimate reality, I guess. The saying absolute truth, that's just not the ultimate truth, the true truth, the Buddha mind truth, the Buddha truth of things. Anyway, so there you go. So thank you for listening for part 2, and stay tuned for part 3 of my Mahayana New Year's special. Namo Amida Butsu.